few people in. There might be still a few people joining us late, but I think we can start. So hello everyone, welcome, good evening. Thank you for coming again and using your evenings for these really useful lecture sessions that we've been running. Today we've got someone from Warwick Business School, WBS, one of the best business schools by far in the UK. So we're really lucky to have a top representative in there come and speak to us. And today we've got Professor John Rudd, and John's specialism really is in marketing. And so that's why you've all joined us today. So he's going to be outlining some of the things that Warwick specifically do within marketing. And obviously, as always with these lectures, looking forward in that industry, looking at where the jobs are, what sort of things are going to be available going forward. So again, fantastic that we've got him here to talk to us. Now, as always, please, if you want to ask him a question, simply add it to the chat, and then I can put it to John at the end of his presentation. His presentation is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes. So as you're watching the presentation, if anything comes to mind, just pop it in the chat and I can put that to John at the end of his presentation. Again, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to hand over to John now. He's going to tell you a bit about marketing at Warwick. Thank you, John.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As he says there, I'm John Rudd. I always like to get the professor there. It kind of makes mum and dad proud. And I'm going to be talking about marketing today. I'm head of the marketing group at Warwick Business School, and before that I spent 10 years in industry. It's a subject I'm passionate about, and I hope that comes through today. So what are we going to talk about? Let's just forward these slides. Okay, so today we're going to really think of this as a taster menu. Because of course, marketing in sort of 40 minutes, it's a huge subject. I mean, we run master's degrees on this kind of thing. So I'm going to give you a flavour of the kinds of things that we talk about. And then at the end, maybe we can get a bit more into the actual curriculum. I brought a curriculum map for you. And if you want to see that, I'm happy to put that up once the talk's finished. So more of a taster menu in terms of what we talk about at Warwick, but I'm going to look at what is marketing, and there are some perceptions and possibly misperceptions about what marketing is, and buyer behaviour, and that's us, that's consumers and also people in businesses buying stuff, and what exactly is going on there. Brands, we all know brands. I mean, we're consumers, we're all very aware of brands. Some marketing outcomes. So why bother? Why do all of this marketing? Is it even important for businesses? You know, we spend all this time and effort doing it. Does it even do anything? Why would businesses be interested in this? And also, I've especially been asked to talk a little bit about digital marketing, and that's obviously a huge topic for marketers at the moment. And then we'll do a bit of Q&A. So I hope that sounds like a plan, and I look forward to taking your questions at the end. Right, well, what is marketing? Well, if we start on the left there, marketing is all about T-shirts and posters, right? Well, that was actually, believe it or not, a direct quote from a course that I ran. And you always start these courses by sort of saying, well, everybody, you know, great you're here. So what do you think marketing is? And this particular participant sort of sat there with his arms folded and said, well, you know, it's all about T-shirts and posters, isn't it? And that was a very advertising lens. It took me back a little bit, because obviously we were going to spend a couple of days together talking about marketing. So I hoped it was a bit more than T-shirts and posters. But I think, you know, in relation to the other stuff that's on there, people immediately think marketing, they think brands, they think advertising, they think, you know, I've been sent my 74th customer satisfaction survey on my phone this week. You know, this is marketing. And also you sometimes hear people say, oh, well, that's just marketing, isn't it? And what they're talking about is sort of spin and hype and some sort of cloak and dagger thing that's designed to separate you from your money. Also in the middle there, and certainly from my time in industry, marketing was sometimes seen as a bit sort of divorced from practice, you know, a bit sort of head in the clouds, and they didn't really understand the real business. You know, they sort of sat on one side. And certainly when you talk to practitioners, we talk to a lot of practitioners to influence our courses at the business school. I think one of their frustrations and one of the benefits of going to Warwick is that you get this sort of broader training. There's a lot of unqualified practice in marketing. So some people sort of drift into a marketing job and they don't really, you know, not being too critical, but they don't really know what they're doing. And so, of course, a lot of what they do is about advertising. They do a lot of push advertising and trying to make people buy something. And I'm going to go through a few ideas today that will hopefully demonstrate why marketing as an activity and a discipline is a bit bigger than just advertising, or as it says there, T-shirts and posters. So I do think that certainly at Warwick, we have a very, very different view of this. And we, given our relationship with employers, we do like to think that we send people out into the world post-degree with skills and capabilities that are valued by employers. So yeah, but I think that is certainly a popular lens. You talk to a lot of people about marketing and they assume you're talking about advertising. Well, if we look at the definitions of marketing out there, and the American Marketing Association is a huge society in America, hundreds of thousands of members. And in 2013, they came up with this definition, and that's a big wordy thing, isn't it? Marketing is the activity, set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners and society at large. Good grief, I nearly ran out of breath. I think what you see there very clearly is a very different view of marketing. It's a lot more than T-shirts and posters. Yes, it's an activity, but they talk about a set of institutions and processes. Now that talks more about a systemic presence in the business. Yeah, it's a more considered view. There's a process view. It's institutionalized in the business. It isn't something that's tacked on in terms of a bit of advertising. It's about creating value, communicating value, and delivering it to stakeholders, such as customers and clients. So customers in a business to consumer sense, if we're selling to consumers, or a business to business sense, if we're selling to businesses. And a lot of businesses sell to other businesses. And they also mention society at large. So there's this wider purpose. So it's not necessarily just about making already quite rich people richer. It's about possibly doing societal good. You know, so we see this in charity marketing, where people are trying to get more donations to create a surplus and invest in whatever good they're trying to do within society. So that definition definitely thinks of a wider idea of marketing than T-shirts and posters. Yes, we're already looking a bit broader. And this connects very heavily into a central idea in marketing. And we talk about this in a lot of our courses, which is the marketing concept. A set of beliefs embedded in employees that drives organizational decision-making through a fundamental commitment to serving customer needs. And that's taken from my book, which is in the 7th edition. It's a wonderful read. I suggest you all buy it for Christmas, or if you can't sleep, it's a great read. But again, I think you see from this marketing concept that it's more than just T-shirts and posters. It's more than just advertising. It's getting people to align their behaviors and the way they make decisions and the way they think about the business in a certain way that looks and focuses on customers. Because even if you're in a charity, you certainly need to connect with your members and you need to convey value to your members. If you're in a business, very few businesses can function very long without customers. So without looking after your customers, without knowing them, you're going to be in trouble really, really quickly. So I hope at that point we've sort of, in a way, dispelled the myth that marketing is all about T-shirts and posters. And we don't sort of dwell too much on that, but we do explore these ideas. And there are some theories and structures that you can put around this to sort of measure these cultures. There's a strategy lens. We have a number of marketing strategy courses. Now, for anybody that knows anything about a business, you will look at that model and say, yeah, that's probably not how we make strategy. A lot of businesses are far more tactical, they're far more emergent, they sort of make strategy on the hoof. But actually, you know, the theory, and remember, theories are just a representation of real life. They're not, they're there to try and explain life, not necessarily sort of be a perfect mirror of real life. When you're looking at marketing strategy in this way, it looks sort of very linear, very process-based. And you know what? It's a nice idea to think about it this way. I think it helps explain certain ideas, but we would take you through this process. Now, that in and of itself is probably a whole module where we would look at, well, what is the purpose of business? Are businesses just in it to make money? Is that the sole purpose? And some would agree with that. That's sort of the Milton Friedman sort of model of businesses. Or actually nowadays, do we have a wider conceptualization of businesses? Are businesses there to be sustainable and to do wider so good and actually not to sort of, leave a legacy for future generations of sort of, waste and devastation. So we talk about business purpose, environmental analysis, and that's everything from the big macro things that impact on businesses like politics and economics and technology, to the micro issues. What are our competitors doing? What do our customers think about us? What do they think about our competitors? How can we be better? There's also the company analysis. So what are we good at? What are we good at now? What do we need to be good at? Where's the market headed? What do we need to invest in? And that helps us develop a broad idea of where we're going. Where's the business moving in future? And that's our core strategy. So how do we deliver our core strategy? Well, we certainly need to know what our target market is. What type of customers do we want to sell to? If we have 100 customers in our particular market, do we need to just throw all of our marketing at all 100 customers, 20 of which probably aren't going to buy our product? Or are we better actually focusing on the customers who we think are likely to buy our product, and we can really compete with people to target those? So within that market target bracket, we look at segmentation, targeting, and things like that. We also look at competitive advantage, and the shortcut for competitive advantage is, well, why would anybody want to buy from us anyway? Given we have competition, what's so special about us? And those two things combined create our competitive positioning. So this is the position that we want to hold in the market, and the position that others might be wanting to take from us. So there's kind of really always a kind of a fighting sort of battle analogy with all of this stuff. And you'll talk about that in your strategy module, these lenses that you can look at strategy through. And then really, how do we make that happen? Well, we implement, And a lot of marketers talk about the marketing mix, and there are various lenses you can look at the marketing mix, but essentially it looks at product, price, place, and promotion. So what product do we want to make? What price do we need to charge? How are we going to promote it? And that is, by the way, the advertising bit. That is the t-shirts and posters bit. And also the place. What channel of distribution are we going to use to get our products or services to our customers? And that's the marketing mix. And then we'll control and we'll organize the organization around that. But you'll see from that, and again, going back to our earlier point about t-shirts and posters, I'm talking about advertising down there in the marketing mix. And that is about the t-shirts and posters. But can you see the amount of thought that has gone into it prior to us implementing the marketing mix? So you can see that if you look at marketing as purely advertising, you miss so much, and potentially you can go so far wrong. That's marketing as strategy, right? Buyer behavior. That's you and me. I'm talking about there. So this is really a more psychology-based area. We've got some quite world-class academics in the business school who are researching in CB, consumer behavior. We also have a behavioral sciences group that is quite literally world-leading. I mean, they really are regarded very, very highly. So actually, this is a big area for us. There are many models and theories in this area. But the one I've put up there, and this is kind of a shortcut of a model, but that's the Blackwell, Mignard, and Engel model from 2005, I think, from the top of my head. And that looks at in terms of a buying group. So if you think about in your household and you think about a decision that's made in your household, there's usually an initiator, and this person begins the process of considering a purchase. There's an influencer, attempts to persuade others, a decider who actually has the power and financial authority to make the ultimate choice, and they're quite important in this. A buyer, the person who actually does it, they conduct the transaction, and the user, the actual consumer. Now the picture there is of my daughter Emily and our King Charles Spaniel. Do you know what? Emily kind of went through this process in our house. I was definitely against getting another dog. We had a Labrador, and Emily decided that we were going to get a King Charles Spaniel. So she definitely began the process of considering the purchase. She'd already got this in her head. And then she started to persuade others. She knew I was going to be a tough sell. So she got into her brother and she started showing him cute pictures of King Charles Spaniels. And then she talked to her mom and said, Mom, we really need to do this. The other dog's lonely. And look, here's some cute pictures of a King Charles Spaniel. And she brought them round. So then I had 3 people in my ear saying, you know what, Dad, we need to get a King Charles. And guess what? I eventually caved. Yes, guilty as charged, I'm afraid. So they came to me and I mean, it's just how it is in our house that I happen to have the financial authority. It's not always the case. And I said, oh, go on then. And then literally the moment I did that, they were out of the door. They went to buy it. And then guess what? You would think that Emily would be the actual consumer, but no. No. About 2 months into the purchase, she decided that she really liked the Black Labrador anyway, so Darcy was kind of secondary. And funnily enough, Darcy now spends a lot of time with me, which is kind of ironic, really, because I was definitely against it at the time. So again, the Blackwell Miniard model sort of explains that particular process. And we look at all sorts of models that are designed to unpick the black box or your brain. And that's important for marketers to understand how people make decisions, because if we know how they make decisions, then we can start tailoring our marketing, our advertising, to meet those criteria and say, look, we're really good at this. We know you make decisions on this basis. We're really good at this. Buy this. And I guess at the moment, you're sort of going through a similar decision process about whether you should come to WBS or not. So maybe you could apply the Blackwell Miniard model to your decision. I don't know. But that's I mean, that's a massive area of literature in a very, very short time. But that's the Blackwell Miniard angle. Brands are pretty cool. I mean, this is an area of interest for me. Brand is a name, term, design, symbol, or any other feature that identifies one's seller's good or service as distinct from those of other sellers. So it's a brand, and it kind of goes back to apocryphal discussions about sort of when we sort of started to trade things. You know, so we were just sort of coming out of a subsistence economy back in the Middle Ages, and people would brand their sheep, and somebody who had the best pastures, their brand would represent certain things. You know, they would be known for being good quality, and they could probably charge more. So I think that's where it comes from. This idea of a brand is very much a physical brand, but of course nowadays we see them as representations of logos and stuff like that. And branding is the process of endowing products and services with the power of a brand. So that's what we do as marketers. What we try and do is we sort of say, well, you know, this is what this, and I'll move on to the next slide. This is what this logo represents. Because I think a lot of people, when they see logos, they think, well, that's branded. And that's true. But of course, brands are so much more to marketers. They generally have logos, but they definitely create a distinct identity in your head. So if you think of brands that you are aware of, I don't know, maybe Apple, Coke, Pepsi, these all conjure up ideas in your head. You have a memory, some fun memories, some not so fun memories, but you carry these things in your brain, in your black box. And this is why consumer behavior is so important. And consumers, that's us, we draw and retain associations with these brands. So they're kind of shortcuts for marketers. So I'll do a little experiment. And don't worry, you're not being tested on this. We're not being recorded as far as you know. We think of a Rolex. All right, now let's think of a Rolex through the marketing mix. If we think about price, probably going to be quite a high, relatively high price, yeah? Place. Where will we buy a Rolex? Well, probably go to a high-end jeweler's or maybe in an airport, but it's still going to be in a high-end kind of scenario. You're not going to go down the local market and buy a Rolex, and if you do, it's probably not going to be a Rolex, right? So price, place, promotion. Think of the advertising for a Rolex. It's all pretty high-end. You see it at sporting events. Yeah, and it's all very quality, and the people who are associated with it are all generally gorgeous, aren't they? So again, there's a certain type of advertising that goes with the Rolex. And the promotion, well, we talked about that, price, place, and product. So product, we think about a Rolex product. Are they sort of cheap? Are they awful sort of plasticky things? No, they're made from high-end stuff, probably gold, maybe diamonds, right? But I mean, it's high-end stuff. Now, guess what? We've just done that. I didn't have to show you a brochure. I didn't have to get a Rolex out. I don't own one, by the way, but I didn't have to get one out. You hold all this in your head just by looking at the logo. And that's what marketers are trying to do. They don't have to explain the product every time they show it you. They create these associations through the brand. Here's just, I mean, this is just because I'm a marketing nerd, but I went to a conference a couple of years ago in Texas. It's a tough life being an academic, guys. It's awful. This is when we were allowed to travel. Remember in the good old days when we were allowed to travel around and meet other humans? But this was taken over the period of about half an hour. Top left is when the break started. So we came out of the session and I thought, I'm going to watch this. Now look at the Coke. Look at the Coke on the right. So we go from top left, we go across, starts to get decimated. We go to the bottom, it's gone. So what happened to Pepsi? You got to kind of feel sorry for Pepsi, right? But this does replicate actually what we see in the sales. Coke tends to outsell Pepsi by about 2 to 1. However, when you actually get in a blind test, Pepsi is always preferred to Coke. Every single time, people prefer Pepsi to Coke. So that's the power of the brand. That's the power of the brand. Even though people prefer the taste of Pepsi, given a choice, they will take Coke, generally speaking. And that's kind of a global phenomenon. On the left there, we kind of replicated this with some students, and we do experiments with students. Not medical experiments, by the way, just generally consumer behavior experiments. But not every class gets to do this, but with some we do. What we did really, we took the branded stuff and we kind of switcherooed it and we put it in non-branded. And then we took the non-branded stuff, we put it in branded. And then we kind of mixed up the tests. So we
John,
said,
John,
yeah?
Ever so sorry to interrupt you. We're really enjoying your presentation. I think your volume is going in and out ever so slightly. I think there may be a slight issue with the cable on your mic headphone setup.
Oh, wow. I'm terribly sorry about that.
You're just going very quiet occasionally. I didn't want people to miss.
Oh, terribly sorry about that.
Fantastic. So you should be okay.
Oh, right, okay.
But if it gets difficult to hear, I'll let you know. Okay.
I will adjust the cable again. I'm terribly sorry about that.
No problem. Okay,
right.
Great. Carry on. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, not at all. I'm really sorry about that. So we sort of switcherooed the product. We put branded in non-branded, non-branded in branded, and we said, hey, what do you think? Do you like this product? And guess what? Every time people thought it was the branded one, they preferred it to what they thought was the non-branded one. Now, that tells you a lot about the power of a brand. It was actually the same product. They were tasting the stuff that previously they said, oh, yeah, I always prefer the brand. You put the non-branded stuff in the branded wrapper or the branded tub, or you spread it on toast, and they prefer what they think is the branded item, which was actually non-branded. So you can see there the power of brands. There's a great website called Interbrand, and it sort of rates the different brands in the world. And it sort of gives you the top 100 brands every year, and they give them a value. And companies invest so much money in this. Disney are kind of the poster people for this. And remember we talked about employees and making sure employees embody the values of the brand and they deliver the brands. Well, at Disney, you're not employed. You go for a casting. So you're not interviewed, you go for a casting. And then when you pick up your uniform, it's kind of like called the dress, I think it's called the dressing room or something like that. So they make a lot of the theatre of the experience, because they say it's the happiest place on earth, right? Whether it is or not, I don't know, but they say it's the happiest place on earth. So wouldn't it be awful if people were walking around with sort of uniforms that didn't look right or costumes that didn't look right, and they looked a bit sad and a bit down in the mouth? I mean, that just wouldn't work, right? So Disney, yes, their advertising, their front of house is fantastic, but the way they deliver what they're trying to do, this happiest place on earth experience, is perfectly aligned. So their product or the service that they deliver, you go into a Disney park, everything's pristine. It's new and fresh and freshly painted. Everybody's happy, right? So from their point of view, they really are trying to create this experience of being the happiest place on earth. And we also talk about sort of the experience economy. People talk a lot about experiences now and service businesses and stuff like that. And that's very important. So I think you can see the power of brands. And we do major a lot on this in our courses at Warwick. Right, marketing outcomes, customer satisfaction, meeting or exceeding customer expectations. You hear a lot about this, and I'm sure you've all filled in customer satisfaction surveys, right? And this is this surplus, hopefully, of delivery over expectation, because we all hold expectations. We may have read a review about a particular restaurant and says, oh, it's fantastic, it's a 3-star Michelin, or, you know, it's wonderful and the food's wonderfully cheap, but it's ever such high quality. Or you've booked a hotel and it says a short walk from the beach. And then you get there and it is a short walk if you want to leap off a cliff and plummet 300 feet. Otherwise, it's a 15-minute taxi drive. Or you go to the restaurant and the food's horrible and the service is awful and you get sat next to the toilet. Yeah, so the delivery there hasn't matched the expectations. You're likely to be unsatisfied. If the delivery matches the expectation or it exceeds it, you're probably going to be satisfied or even very satisfied. And that's kind of what we want. Now, interestingly enough, it's a popular idea, but the research evidence is equivocal. There isn't a direct link between high satisfaction and things like loyalty and things like retention. And there's a number of ideas around that. So we poked that quite a lot. Some of it's to do with the survey design, and I'll talk about that sort of at the bottom of this slide. There's a net promoter score, which is an alternative to satisfaction. And again, the research evidence on net promoter score linking to any kind of loyalty or even profitability is tenuous at best. But Reichheld, who wrote the book, has probably bought a gold encrusted island off the back of it. So good for him, I say. But of course, there's variance in survey design. I spent a lot of time actually in Southeast Asia in 2019, and I don't remember what airline it was, but I flew from KL down to Singapore, and I was given a satisfaction survey, and there was no negative anchor. The worst answer I could get was I was broadly satisfied. I couldn't, even if the air hostess had been sort of poking me in the eyes with a spoon and kicking me and throwing coffee over my head, the worst answer I could give was, things were okay. So, you can, survey design does count for a lot. It can become ritualized in that, people focus on the number and they sort of say, well, hey, has our satisfaction gone up by 0.2 this month? And everybody, oh, yes, great, that's good. And it doesn't really mean anything. It's a meaningless number. I mean, what is important is what customers think about you. And it brought me in mind when I was putting this together. I bought a car a few years ago. And we'd been through the process, and I was just about to sign all the paperwork, and the guy said, oh, yeah, let me just stop you there. In about a week's time, you're going to get a call from our head office, and they're going to ask you to fill in a satisfaction survey. And I said, right. And he said, yeah, thing is, it's sort of a 10-point scale. And if you don't give us 9 or 10, he said, basically everybody in the dealership will just lose their bonus. It'll be a scene of devastation and waste, really. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. He said, yeah, head office. And I thought, I realized I was just being gamed. Now, I've got to say, I like the guy. I probably did give him 9. He was very good. But the point was, they weren't really interested in whether I'd had a good or bad experience. They were trying to game the survey so that everybody got a bonus. And so therefore, what's the point really of doing a satisfaction survey when it's the numbers that the number becomes more important than the feedback from the customer? Because what businesses want to know is, did we do a good job or not? So this is a really interesting area, one of my pet areas. We do definitely get to talk about this in the module. I've touched on loyalty and retention. So we want customers to come back. We want to retain customers, and also that phrase, delighting the customer. And we kind of poke those a little bit in some of the modules and say, well, yeah, these all sound very good, but does it actually pay? Is it meaningful? And actually, what is loyalty? What is retention? And I'm not going to get into that, guys. It's almost, there's a whole lecture there. And also social good. There's a massive campaign at the moment in the UK that the government are running. And it's quite a powerful campaign. It's certainly not warm and fuzzy, but there are pictures of people who actually had COVID and they've got masks on, and there's sort of a narrative that goes across the top, look him or her in the eyes and tell them you always keep a safe distance. And what it's saying is, are you really, adhering to the lockdown guidelines, or are you flaunting them? And if you are, then, this could be the result. You can infect somebody and this could be the result. And it's a really powerful campaign. So I think very often people look at marketing through this advertising profit lens, but actually, there's a lot of sort of social good that can be done through marketing. And of course, a lot of charities that use marketing to spread the word and to get more donations and do stuff like that. We talk a lot to businesses and practitioners, and they influence what we teach in the classroom. And this idea of signals is becoming more important. So customers are businesses are looking at social media. What is the customer voice saying? What are they telling us? And they're trying to combine this with customer satisfaction data and perhaps quantitative data around purchase. And they're using AI to bring in all of these signals, as I say there, to give a flavor of, well, what's going on with our customers? Where are our weak points? Where are our strong points? How can we capitalize on this? What do we need to work on? So digital is definitely creeping into this, and AI is seen as a popular or a promising tool to develop this space. It's not perfect, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I was asked specifically to talk about digital marketing, and it's a massive area. I mean, in terms of the researchers at Warwick, a big interest in digital and sort of, what's going on in digital. How do consumers behave in a digital space? What does this mean for businesses? And I think there's a lot of confusion in practitioners in terms of, what to do. And I think some of those quotes help with that. Always good to start with a quote. So what is digital marketing? It's achieving marketing objectives through digital media, data and technology. And I thought it'd be nice just to pop back up that strategy diagram that we talked about earlier, because when you think about it, can't really see a lot of points on there that wouldn't be impacted by digital in some way, in terms of either data gathering, helping us gather data, helping us synthesize data to make decisions, and maybe helping us implement. So I think digital, if you look at it through a strategic lens, runs right through marketing there. And so I guess the question would be, for companies that aren't really using digital, why not? And why couldn't you do that? But as I say, we talk to practitioners a lot, and I mean, these are real quotes. And I think the one has some, the second one down has some merit. Isn't digital marketing just marketing now? I think there's some truth in that, but I do worry a little bit that people see AI and data as sort of this holy grail in some way that's going to solve everybody's problems. And I mean, you guys are smart. You know that the data's only as good as the way you collect it. So the old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. If you're not collecting the data well, then it's meaningless anyway. It really depends on what you do with the data. And actually, and again, we have quite an analytical focus in the marketing modules. If you give me a big enough data set and you tell me what you want me to tell you it says, I can pretty much make it do that. I mean, you can find a correlation in anything if the data set is big enough. Now, correlation isn't causality, we can get into that, but I could probably find a correlation between the temperature of my tea and what time the sun will go down tonight, if you give me a big enough data set. Now, I'm fairly sure there's no causality there, but my point isn't that. My point is that you can't just rely on data and tech to solve all your problems. A human is going to have to look at this and say, are we doing the right thing? In my opinion. And that's why we need marketers, and we need marketers that are well trained and can ask these questions and don't just rely on tech. And the third one's a real quote. I mean, we did it. They were talking about social media. We did it because it just seemed like everyone else was doing it. So there was no reason. They just did it. They spent some money doing that. And I said, well, why? Have you measured the impact? Do your customers like it? Do you get leads from it? Have you sold more product? Oh, they're good questions. No, we haven't really looked at that. So I think, again, I think what we try and embody in some of our students is this sort of inquiring mentality, this kind of, well, why are we doing this stuff? And can we measure it? Can't measure everything, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. I think there are a lot of concerns around digital. I mean, cybersecurity. It's great that this Zoom meeting hasn't been hacked. And I mean, Zoom have had its problems, let's face it. And also companies having their data hijacked and being held to ransom. I mean, that's been something that a lot of companies have struggled with. I think there are some social implications. I won't dwell too long on those, but I mean, the data is really clear about the differences in different societal sort of strata in terms of access to computers, really, and also then access to the data. And that's worrying, really, when you see that, because there are great swathes of society that are kind of being left behind technologically. And I think there are some question marks there, and certainly some question marks for societal marketers and governments, I think. Really funny, when I was talking to a guy who's sort of head of a continent for a very large data house, and he's a really interesting fellow. I won't tell you who it is because it's not fair, and I haven't said to him that I would use this as an example, but they're using an AI system at the moment. And in the UK, and I'm sure a lot of you will know this, sarcasm plays quite well. We use sarcasm as a humorous kind of lever in the UK. And AI doesn't recognize sarcasm. So if I wrote a review that says, oh, thanks so much for putting me next to the toilet when I ate at your restaurant, then AI won't pick that up. They will see that as a positive comment. So, it's in its infancy. I think it's a big deal. But it's certainly companies, I mean, McKinsey just launched some really interesting stuff that's available on their website if you want to take a look, and that's a pretty cool website. They're trying to do this, sort of bring in these signals and to create sort of really rich customer data. But it's in its infancy. It will evolve at a rate of knots, I'm sure. Certainly for marketers, I think control is an issue. How much control do we have really on our business and our customers through social media? Because it is a little bit like the Wild West out there. And if you look at that example on the right, where Kylie Jenner, I don't know whether you saw this one, it was a couple of years ago now, where she sent a tweet out, and it's something like, "Oh, is anybody else stop using Snapchat? I'm so over it," or something like that. Anybody want to guess what it did to Snapchat's share price? Yeah, it wiped about $1.3 billion off their share price. And that was one tweet. And she has over 200 million followers. I think it's since returned, but not necessarily to the levels it was at previously. And also scalable mistakes. I mean, there's some great examples where people have posted stuff on their website that they've been sent by their PR people, but they haven't edited it. So they sort of said something like, "Hey, Joe, you should do this. It'll definitely get a reaction." And they've actually posted that as opposed to editing it and just giving the post. So I think the control and the scope for making scalable mistakes is incredible for marketers. So again, it's not something you can just kind of do and play at. You've really got to have some control over that. Digital is a big area for the business school. We've got a great information systems group. Certainly in marketing, there's been an explosion of research interest, and we're developing a few modules along this line. It's something we've kind of looked at in the past, but we've been kind of looking at other things, really, a more analytical space, but we're definitely going to do that more digital. We have a couple of digital modules, but we need to do more in that space on undergraduate for sure. Practical concerns, lack of knowledge. I think a lot of companies are just kind of, what is this all about? And it really echoes that previous comment about, well, everybody else is doing it, so we kind of did it. But, what do we get out of it? AI is very helpful with that, actually, and certainly, the kind of Google data that people get from this sort of stuff is really helpful for marketers. But there's some legislation coming in the UK about cookies and being able to trace people's data. So that's going to be a game changer, I think. But again, marketers are struggling with these. And also this idea of a tech clash. People are fed up with all of this and being bombarded with advertising messages and customer surveys and stuff like that. So people, there's this idea that people are really pushing back against this technology, which I don't know. I mean, I have some sympathy for that, but you look at the data. I mean, I won't go through those individually because, I'm just aware that I want to leave some time for Q&A at the end, but the data really speaks for itself, right? I mean, we can say we're kind of fed up with it. We can say we're bored with it. We can say, hey, we want less of that, but the numbers are really clear. I mean, digital is here to stay. I think it represented about 20% of all e-commerce, of all retail transactions. I think that was fourth quarter last year in the US. I mean, it's massive. And that's like virtually doubled in the last 3 or 4 years. It depends where you look, but I mean, it's the future. I was listening to a webcast by Sir Martin Sorrell, who was head of WPP, which is a massive sort of marketing conglomerate. And his view was that digital is kind of it. I mean, there's a lot of big brands that just don't do anything other than digital advertising now. So all of their marketing budget goes into digital. They don't do anything on television or any other media now. It's all digital. And I think that's probably the way it's going to go. But I do think, as I said earlier, I think there's always going to be room for a well-trained marketer to give a strategic view on this and to ask the right questions. So, for me, I think customers, and that's us guys, we buy and receive value. And that's whether it's, a business to consumer deal, you walking into a shop and looking at brands and making a choice, or whether it's a business to business. So I'm business A trying to sell into business B. There's still value being exchanged, and it's how that value is made up that's important. I think customers buy solutions to problems. And I think very often people just see it as shifting units. They're selling stuff. And of course they're not. We buy a solution to a problem. I feel hungry, so I'm buying a solution. I could buy an apple, but I don't. I have 3 Mars bars. Why is that? Now, that's an interesting thing for a marketer. Why do I do that? Why do I have a McDonald's and not an apple? Some would say because it tastes nicer. But look, I'm not going to get into that, right? But these are the kind of things we unpick in our courses. We get into the mind of the consumer. We unpick the black box. I think digital and AI will be an increasingly important of the marketer's toolbox, but it is part of the toolbox. It shouldn't become the box. You know, the way we collect data, the type of data is important. And I think marketers will always be needed to ask those questions. Say, well, why do we collect it that way? Are we asking the right questions? What answers do we need? But, and I think this is a nice way to close, guys, marketing is still sometimes about t-shirts and posters. And on that note, I think that's a good point to end. Thank you for listening. Have you got any questions?
Yeah, have you got any questions? Thanks, John. That was absolutely fantastic. Really fascinating, I thought. I've got lots of questions, so I'll give people a couple more minutes if they want to add something. And I think there's one that's just got in there. While we're doing that, I think just to give you a tiny break, John, as well. Imran, should I just bring you in just for 1 or 2 minutes, just to maybe give a quick overview of entry requirements and things like that? Did you just want to very quickly just give what you're generally looking for in terms of grades of an entry for A levels for WBS?
Right. So for WBS courses, for example, management, you will need 3 A's for your A levels. In terms of subject requirements, only accounting and finance will require you to do math at A level. If you're just interested in management, there is no need to do math at A level. But you will need to have done it at GCSE level, for your GCSEs, right? For accounting and finance, math at A level will be required, and the grades required are 3 A's for WBS courses.
That's great. Thank you very much, Imran. It's really helpful. If you have any other questions about that, obviously, Imran, maybe you want to put your contact details in the chat. So if anyone does have any of those kinds of questions, they can follow up with you. So we have got some marketing questions for you, John. So we've got Anya, you might see in the chat here. If you're able to click onto the chat, you can read it. So do you think companies,
good question.
Do customer ratification surveys more for getting data to identify areas for improvement or presenting the data in advertising?
Great question. I think there are multiple drivers as to why companies think they do it. And that kind of goes back to my earlier point. I think the less thoughtful companies collect customer satisfaction data because it sounds like the right thing to do. So they'll bang a survey together, might not necessarily put a lot of thought into it, and then they'll get back a number, and then they'll say, well, is that a good, bad, or indifferent number? You know, do we score well on these questions or not? And then that's enough. And they say, well, okay, that's fair enough. I think the more thoughtful companies will sort of use those as an index. They'll say, well, okay, we've got some data here. Are we really asking the right questions? And actually, is there more to be done? So what you see in a lot of companies is they want to talk to customers, because actually surveys are good at certain things, but what they're not good at is nuance. So for instance, you know, I mean, the great one is, thanks so much for putting me by the toilet when I ate at your restaurant. Again, the sarcasm would be lost on some people, but if you talk to them, you'll get that nuance. So I think some companies kind of want to have a survey because they want to have a survey, and they're not really interested in the data, and they're not really interested in making change. I think, so in terms of, do they do the surveys for getting data? I think they might think that they do, but the quality of data will probably not be that good. They're not really interested in what customers think. If the only way they connect with customers is a survey, they're not interested in what customers think, in my opinion. I think actually the data for advertising, that is a really interesting one, because companies do that. You know, we have a 99.9% satisfaction rating. The problem with that is that if you advertise a 99.99 satisfaction rating, and somebody then follows that and say, oh, I bet they're really good, so they use their products or services and they're not very good, then you set up an expectation gap. Because the expectation gap is these guys are 100% brilliant, I'm going to love it. So if you then buy their goods and services and they're not, you're going to be dissatisfied. So I think it's really important to be asking the right questions and to be very confident if you're going to push these 90% satisfaction ratings out there. Also as well, and again, this isn't particularly for today, but if you know, and this would be more sort of on the consultancy side, but if you gave me a satisfaction survey and said, I'd like 90% plus satisfaction, I'll do that for you, no problem, and you won't have to change anything. I will just change the questions you ask. I will edit the questions you ask, and I'll probably change the scale. Nothing's changed in your business. You still may be lousy at certain things, and you still may be good at others, but I will deliver that number. So again, I think the overall point isn't to focus on the number. It's about the quality of data and the willingness to make change as a result of it. So it's a more considered approach. But that's a great question, Annie.
Thank you.
Is marketing? Is marketing?
Sorry, I keep talking over you, John.
No, go for it.
The market being a demanding job. I don't think what we're getting here is that the job itself is hard. I'm sure you'll agree. Being a marketer is the hardest job there is in the whole world. I think is there a demand wherever you go for it. In other words, and I think probably we're particularly talking about Asia and Southeast Asia in this case as well.
Right.
Obviously, you obviously have a stronger background in the UK and Europe, but globally, is this something you would expect to be a job that is already in high demand and would continue to be in the future?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, great question. I mean, clearly academics, that's the most demanding job in the world, right? But yeah, I think people who can connect with customers and own that space, they're in demand. Now, whether you call them marketers, whether you call them information systems people, whether you call them data officers, I think in a way that the job title is to miss the point. I think if you graduate with from Warwick with a marketing specialisation, then you can pretty much go into whatever marketing job you want. And I mean, marketing jobs are available all around the world, whether it's on the creative side, so you go into the agency and you make adverts, or whether you're on more the brand side, the brand management. These people are in demand. Don't worry about that. But I do think there is a huge gap in most companies for people who can come in and say, right, you know, what is the relationship with your customer? How do we manage that relationship? Where are the connection points? How do you collect this data? What data do you collect? So the skills that we embed within a marketing degree at Warwick, certainly, are in demand. I think if you want to label that marketing, that's fine, but we have a lot of marketing graduates that go into sales roles that probably do connect into customers in different ways. We have graduates that go into more sort of information data roles. But I think, you know, I mean, we might be sort of not answering that specific question, but I think are marketing people in demand? Yes. If the question was, is it a demanding job? I think it certainly is. But I think most jobs in corporate now are quite demanding from what I hear. I mean, I've been out of corporate now for what, 20 years? Yeah, probably 20 something years. But I have a lot of friends in corporate. I talk to a lot of people in corporate. And yeah, I mean, it's certainly a demanding job for sure, but it's fun. I worked in it for 10 years and I had an absolute blast. It's a great world. It really is. What are your thoughts on viral marketing?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on viral marketing strategies, like how brands are using Twitter to hop on certain viral trends? I mean, in a way, kind of, it depends on what your brand stands for. I mean, if it's kind of, if you're sort of a young, edgy cut type brand and you want to connect with those sort of, that sort of segment, then I think it's a perfectly valid strategy. I think, again, you've got to be really careful using social media and especially Twitter, because your one tweet can really change things. And you don't, it's not like, I don't know, me saying something, say I was doing a radio ad and I kind of make a comment that people don't like. I've probably hit what, 500, but maybe maximum 500,000 people. You put it on Twitter, millions of people are going to see that mistake. And so I think it's fine as long as you're confident in what you're doing, you know, and that you know the kind of people that are going to see that message, and you've used Twitter, so you're confident to use that media. But if you're kind of doing it as a, oh, here's something that's really opportunistic, let's just try it, I think it's a dangerous thing to do unless you're sure you know what the outcome is going to be. If it's only going to be a positive or neutral outcome, then I would say why not. But I think it's one of those areas that could, you know, potentially be misconstrued. I think you're really on thin ice there. So I'm partly saying yes, but be careful, I guess.
Just sort of moving into that a bit, obviously looking at branding outside maybe of you know, into other areas, obviously things like politics. I mean, certainly within the kind of social media era, And we've had two very idiosyncratic presidents of the United States in that time, both in Obama and Trump. Both of that was kind of generated ever so slightly or seemingly by social media. So I mean, in terms of, is that something that you can see just as a continual, or something that people would get wise to in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think certainly the campaigns that, and remember the people that these are just the kind of the poster people. I mean Trump kind of did his own thing, really. I mean he's a one-off. I don't see that being replicated. But the people that got these people into office are highly skilled individuals. I mean, you know, you may criticize their politics, but the people that got Obama elected are probably the best, or some of the best in the world at manipulating social media data and using it and knowing how messages play out. And then the same will be for Trump. The same will be for most politicians now. There was a lot of discussion actually within the Brexit. If you remember when Brexit was a thing before the pandemic. Yeah, what was Brexit, right? There was a lot of discussion about that and that manipulation of that voice through social media. So in a way, politicians are just kind of the poster children for what's going on underneath that. And what's going on underneath that are really highly qualified and highly educated people who really know how to manipulate these things. And you sometimes get a glimpse behind the curtain, like Dominic Cummings in the UK. But these are people who really understand data, and they really understand how to use that to achieve their goals and to manipulate voice. I think, in a way, there'll be sort of an anti-Trump sort of move away from social media from Biden. I don't see him engaging with social media in any way like Trump is going to do. I think he's a far more thoughtful president, and I think he'll have people who'll do that for him. I don't think he'll want to personally do that. And that was kind of Trump's thing, really. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's here to stay. I think politicians will still do that. But, you know, and we will see them make the occasional mistake. But I do think they'll have teams of people looking at this. It's not Donald, it's not sort of Biden just sitting there or Obama sitting there just typing out tweets. They have teams of people doing this for them, not only just to get them to elected, but to continue that sort of brand image. And so everything they'll post will be on message. It'll have gone through several layers of discussion before it gets out there.
So we've got some kind of material recommendations. I guess it could be anything to read, watch, or listen to, really. You can expand it out to podcast or anything, really. What's going on at the moment, John? What would be really good for people that want to get into some of this stuff?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think who's doing some nice stuff. I follow sort of multiple sort of touch points, really. I mean, there are people who I just enjoy listening to when they do talks. So I read all sorts of stuff. So I see myself as a social scientist as well as somebody that's interested in marketing. So I think as a social scientist, you have to be interested in society and just people in general. I mean, I read anything by Malcolm Gladwell. I think he's amazing. I read anything by Joseph Pine. I mean, these are more management type speakers. Yeah, because I could recommend some academic journals to you, but you would be asleep within 10 minutes, probably with some of them. Joseph Pine, Malcolm Gladwell. I really enjoy listening to Martin Sorrell. I was telling you earlier, there's a guy who used to be the sort of president CEO of WPP, which is a massive marketing services agency. He's now set up another company, which I forget what it is, but it's sort of it's like a capital vehicle, but they do digital advertising. And I try and listen to him whenever he's got something to say. There's a guy in the UK called Mark Ritson, who is extremely edgy. And if you're easily offended, I would probably not read his stuff. But he does actually post some quite interesting stuff. And he, like me, is a big evangelist for qualified marketing. I think, like me, he sees a vacuum in education of a lot of marketers, and you do get a lot of people who say they're marketers, and it's more about sort of spin and hype and hubris rather than actually considered, you know, a sort of a more data information based decision making, as opposed to, hey, this is what I think today and you should do it. So yeah, I touch on a lot of web sources. I think McKinsey send out a lot of thoughtful stuff, and I would try and check out that Interbrand site. they have some great reports which are free to download, and they've started doing a lot of webinars as well, which you can hop into, and they're really quite thoughtful. They sort of gather the great and the good, and they'll discuss a particular topic. They're usually about an hour or so, and again, some really thoughtful stuff that you can then download and kind of go off and think about. But there's all sorts of stuff out there. It's very hard to sort of say one thing, really. But I mean, if you're looking for the big corporate, sorry, go on.
Paul Arden.
No, I don't. Okay. No, what is that? Is he sort of more what's his deal?
Yeah, he wrote. It's not how good you are, how good you want to be. I thought it's a kind of intro thing. It's obviously it's quite a good way in. So it's a bit of a play on the art of war and that way of going into it.
Ah, okay.
Advertising marketing.
Yeah, well, I don't know that, but I mean, I always go on recommendation. I'm always looking for good stuff. So Paul Arden, yeah, okay.
There you go. Okay, so we've got some other questions here. So what would you say are the top 2 skills that a student interested in marketing would need to have to succeed in this career? I mean, I guess you can go for more than 2 if you want, but what are the main skills?
That's a great question.
And we do that a lot, John. We're obviously always looking at these transferable skills, things you can get from different A-levels and degrees, and always being aware of us slightly that most people don't end up in the career that their degree was in. In other words, most people with a law degree are not lawyers at the moment. And obviously similar with marketing, as I'm sure you'll be able to tell us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I was talking to I can't tell you which company, but it's a large oil company, and she was vice, they have these big long titles, vice president of the universe, and her first degree was zoology, and then she was in charge of marketing. But it's I mean, that's quite a big question, really. I mean, you read all of the academic literature, criticality comes out big, so the ability to think critically and to be analytical. I think that those come out big. But I mean, for me, the thing that we keep coming back to, even in the digital age, is the ability to, in a way, the interpersonal skills, the ability to be able to connect with people and to empathize with people and to be lucid and just kind of create that relationship. And I think in digital, we sort of see this move away into data. And time again, you talk to the leaders of organizations and they talk about this, the importance of relationships and the ability to create relationships and engage with other humans. They all talk about that. They all also, and I was listening to, he's the ex-chairman of Rolls-Royce. He was a lovely guy. He's quite poor at the time, but I think he's okay. And he talked about resilience. Now, resilience is one of those words that not a lot of people, some people don't like that word, but the point he was trying to make was this ability to embrace failure and then learn from it and move on. Because it was a similar question to this, and the audience sort of said, well, hey, you've done really well. How did you do it? And he talked about various things. He said, I think I'm bright, but I'm not that bright. I had the ability to select great teams. I put great teams of people around me because I recognized I couldn't do anything. He said, but I think people see me and they think I've never failed. And he said, I've got a long list of failures behind me. And he said, one of my chief abilities is when I fail, when I consider to have failed, I'll sit down, I'll reflect on it and decide on not what anybody else, I'm not going to blame anybody else, what I can do differently next time. And he said, and that for me is a key separator of people who come through and make it in corporate and people who don't, because this ability to look at oneself and say, well, yes, I could blame everybody else, but personal responsibility. So I'm going to do something different next time. And a lot of the senior people talk about that resilience and that acceptance of failure as a positive thing. It's quite you talk to financiers about this, and in Silicon Valley, it's a good thing if you've had a couple of fails under your belt. I mean, nobody wants you to fail, but they see it as almost you've gone through and you've learned from these mistakes, and then you're unlikely to do this. You've kind of taken a few knocks, but you're better for it. Whereas sometimes in the UK, you find that failure is seen as a real negative. So there is a real cultural dimension to that idea of failure. But I think that ability to look at failure, so what can I take from that? so I avoid doing that again in the future. I think that's quite a powerful thing if you can develop that. But I mean, there's a whole bunch of literature on this, but you look at a lot of the academic stuff, it'll say critical thinking, it'll say analytics, but I think when you talk to senior leaders, they talk about resilience and relationships a lot.
That's absolutely brilliant. Oh, it's a great bit of advice, I think, for everyone. I mean, you can put that straight into your A levels now, so that's fantastic. Don't worry about any low grades, no worries. Just carry on, and we'll all see it as a bit of a positive for you. So that's absolutely fine. We've come right up to the hour now, so I'm going to have to end it there. I think it's been. I just want to say thank you again. It's been a fascinating talk. Really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, John. Really appreciate it.
Not at all. So sorry about the sound again. I apologise.
No, it was a minor thing, but it was carrying in and out. But absolutely no problem.
Yeah, it's annoying, right?
As
yeah, it's
always,
annoying, right?
We'll stay online just for a little bit longer. If you want to ask anything directly, John, you're okay. You just stay for another couple of minutes with us.
Yeah.
Imran stay on as well for a couple of minutes. So otherwise, I'd like to say good evening again. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate all the brilliant questions and for the effort you've made. So again, if you'd like to leave the chat now, please do so. And if you do have anything you'd like to discuss with any of us further on, just stay on and turn your microphone on and ask us.